What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this is Spider-Man Hunting Kraven, which is kind of the unofficial sequel to Kraven's Last Hunt. It's actually taking place right now in the Zeb Wells Spider-Man run. But this opens up with Kraven kind of musing to himself, right, about what it is that he did to Spider-Man and the fact that Spider-Man is inevitably going to come for him because he's kind of twisted Spider-Man and turned him into a much darker version of himself. But he's also saying things like, I am Kraven the Hunter, we do not run, I will face the sins of my father, I am my father. Now, there's a reason why he's saying and really talking this way, because there is an event that kind of led up to this in the first place. What this did is it really took place in Amazing Spider-Man number 32. And what ended up happening is there was in Marvel Comics at one point a villain called the Sin Eater. And what it did is it basically absorbed the sins of Norman Osborn, basically like all the things that made him evil and all the evil things he did. But regardless of what name you would choose to assign to it, there was a woman by the name of Dr. Kafka, also known as Queen Goblin, and she had become that character by virtue of Norman Osborn's sins that were injected into her. The idea was to extract those sins and put them back into Norman Osborn, who had since become a superhero known as the Gold Goblin after getting rid of all of his evil and becoming a good guy. What ended up taking place here is that in the midst of this conflict, Kraven, who had the sins confined into his staff, had gone to kill Norman Osborn, and Peter had jumped in the way. So he's basically the one that's carrying around Norman's sins. Hence the reason why he seems so dark and twisted, which you will see over the course of this. The other part of this is, yes, this is Kraven, but no, it's not Kraven. So the idea is that he's not the original Kraven the Hunter. Instead, he's one of 80 clones that were created by the High Evolutionary at the request or the behest of Kraven the Hunter in order to cure himself of his immortality. There's a whole great big huge history behind that. It's not overly necessary here. But this clone refers to the original Kraven as his father. So that's why you get those references that go on there. But the bigger point is that where Kraven is preparing for his hunt against Spider-Man, which is normal, like for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Kraven, it's almost kind of like a ceremonial thing when he prepares to like hunt a target or something along those lines. There's a whole sort of process that he undergoes to get himself ready, right? It's like a girl getting ready to go out on Friday, right? Like it's a whole process, you know what I mean? Like, but what ends up happening is that instead of him undergoing all of this, Peter sneaks up on him and Peter injects him with a kind of serum. And then Kraven ultimately ends up fleeing. But for Peter Parker, because he's so dark and twisted, it's almost a game of sport. There's a kind of fun that goes into this. He tells him to run. Now, the reality here, and this is something that I want to point out, it's one of the things that makes this so incredibly cool. 99.9% of stories involving Spider-Man are him just swinging through New York and doing a thing and then coming across a villain who happens to be doing another thing, and then the two of them fight, Peter wins, and the villain gets shuffled off to like the Raft, right? The prison for superpowered villains or something along those lines. This gives us a side of Peter. What if he becomes the hunter? How good would he be? And the reality is, he is amazing as a hunter, because between his proportional strength of a spider and the fact that he's able to like kind of sleuth and use espionage tactics and so on and so forth, he can be very, very sneaky. He is this exceedingly dangerous guy because Kraven is one of the best hunters and best trackers in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. The only people that I would argue are probably more capable than he is would be like Wolverine and X-23. There may be a couple other people whose names I'm not thinking of at the moment, but Kraven is certainly in the top 5. But for every step he takes, Spider-Man is literally stalking him, right? For every place he hides, Spider-Man is watching him. There comes to a point when he's like hiding under basically a bridge, trying to dodge Peter Parker, right? Trying to avoid Spider-Man. Spider-Man catches him and literally just grabs him and like snaps his arm. And like, it's crazy to see that happen because he overcomes him and he says, I can't believe I was ever scared of you. I can't believe I let you get away with what you did for all those years. And of course, we'll talk about that when we cover the conclusion of Kraven's Last Hunt. And where Kraven says, I'm not my father, the response to Spider-Man is, close enough, because you're still doing the exact same thing that your father did. And like throws him down a waterway and then just kind of like continues on his own hunt. So it's one of those things where like, it's not really even Kraven getting the upper hand here. It's Spider-Man toying with him the entire time. Now, there are also some differences to know, and people who are huge fans of Kraven the Hunter will point this out if they haven't already pointed it out in the comment section, right? You guys are quick to point out flaws. Like, nope, actually, Rob. So here's the thing, right? When it comes to Kraven, like the original Kraven, he'd been hunting for years and years. His skills were honed like the point of a needle, right? I mean, this guy was prodigious. This clone of him, despite having every ounce of ability that his father has, if we want to use that term, he doesn't quite have the history there. So if this were to happen with Peter Parker and the original Kraven, it may transpire far differently. So the bigger point that I'm making here is there's some inexperience that's coming to bear with this whole conflict. But what ends up happening is Kraven himself basically takes to the sewers below New York, because in a lot of ways, the sewers down there are just a giant maze. And for all the abilities that Spider-Man has, the ability to like sniff out his opponent by using scent and things like that, that's not there, right? That doesn't really exist. So he would have to track him the old-fashioned way, assuming he's not watching him already, which he actually is. Because as he's making his way through these sewers, Spider-Man is just kind of like crawling over top of the sewers, keeping an eye on him. It's really spooky, but it's really cool at the same time. But that's when we end up finding out the nature of this serum that Kraven was injected with. It wasn't going to actually do anything to him. Instead, it was designed to attract something else. These are called vermin. Now, these vermin played a role to a degree in the original Kraven's Last Hunt story. The fact that they're being featured here is just a great callback to that original story itself. During that comic, there was a point where Kraven was like masquerading as Spider-Man, and he ended up fighting vermin who basically escaped the sewers of New York and then started like attacking people and so on and so forth. They're not that dissimilar from like the Moloids, the forces of the mole men that reside underground. That's one of the cool things about Marvel. If you read long enough, you start to realize very fast that the Marvel landscape on Earth is much bigger than just like X-Men, Avengers, miscellaneous other superpowered heroes and teams, the Moloids underground, the Eternals, the Deviants, right? There's like a lot of stuff that goes on there. It's wildly expansive and really has been for a number of years. But these vermin immediately attack Kraven, and Spider-Man just kind of watches on. But the reality here is that Kraven is fighting for his life, and he's killing these guys every chance he gets, because if he doesn't, they will kill him. And so Peter Parker, wanting to maintain, or at least kind of being pushed by this somewhat evil nature of himself, actually rescues Kraven the Hunter from the vermin for no other reason than the fact that it allows him to continue the hunt. It allows him to continue tormenting Kraven the Hunter, which he does, right? Kraven's more or less unconscious at this point. Spider-Man grabs him and basically just drags him off, tosses him into a coffin, gives him his gun, and then buries him alive. A very fitting end to this version of Kraven, which is a fantastic callback to Kraven's Last Hunt. Because in that story, Kraven overpowers Spider-Man, shoots him with a rifle, and then buries him, right? So it's just a great reference and a reversal of roles based on all of this. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. This is part of the current Spider-Man run. Let me know if you guys want me to continue covering this. If you didn't see our Kraven's Last Hunt video, make sure you click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.